Yeah, how was school?
Good.
Did you like the lunch?
Yeah, but you didn't give me chicken nuggets.
Those were chicken nuggets.
Yeah, but you didn't give me french fries.
There was no french fries.
But I don't chicken nuggets with rice and cucumbers.
I mean, what are you going to do? You needed vegetables,
Those
so
don't
they
go
didn't have
together.
french fries.
Pretty got french fries.
My name is Kathy Kijinaar, and I'm from the Marshall Islands. I work as the director of the nonprofit Jiwotigum, and I also work as a climate envoy for the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands is located in the northern Pacific region in an area known as Micronesia. It's comprised of 24 main atolls and islands, and spread out over a really huge expanse of ocean. They're atoll islands, which means there's no mountains and they're completely flat and only 2 meters above sea level. We were one of the last islands to be colonized in the Pacific. We were colonized first by the Germans, then the Japanese after after the First World War, and then we were entered into World War II while under Japanese occupation. After that, the U.S. came and took over the Marshall Islands as a trust territory, as what they call the trust territory. And it was during that period where they began to test nuclear weapons. They tested 64 nuclear weapons on Bikini Atoll. And then following that, after the tests ended, the Marshall Islands gained independence and went into a compact of free association. That was a treaty that we signed between the U.S. and the Marshall Islands. And we became in free association with the U.S., meaning we're independent, but we still maintain a relationship with the U.S. that allows free entry into the U.S. So I was born in Medjugorje in the Marshall Islands here. And I moved to Hawaii when I was 6. And the reason why was my mom wanted me to get some additional, some other educational opportunities. Growing up in Hawaii is kind of difficult because there was a lot of tension, racial tension against Micronesians in Hawaii as the latest wave of immigrants and people not really understanding the history and culture of what was bringing us, to Hawaii. Yeah, so some of the experiences that demonstrate the racism that I experienced in the Marshall Islands includes being told I was really smart for a Micronesian on a regular basis, having teachers be really surprised when I did well in school. There was fights that were in schools where the Micronesian boys were getting targeted. The Micronesian Marshallese embassy getting flooded with hate mail, literally hate mail letters. People telling you to go back because you're a cockroach. Spray paints, graffiti calling Micronesians cockroaches. Yeah. Yeah, I think it really impacts when you start to learn how to, when you learn that your community is a problem, you water yourself down, you lose touch with your identity and your culture. You're not as proud, you get really insecure about who you are and who your people are, and that can really impact you as a young person to look at yourself that way. I remember meeting a Hawaiian who grew up out in the US, and I met her in college and she was like, "You're Micronesian?" And I said, "Yeah." And she was like, "Don't people hate Micronesians in Hawaii?" And it was such a blunt question, and that's how she was. But at the time I remember thinking it was such a shock to me to hear it said that way, and then I realized, yes, they really do hate us. And then it became, and now that was really my first time to really start to process and be like, oh, we didn't deserve to be treated that way, and that was a huge awakening for me. And that was when I began to delve more deeply into the legacies of these issues that our community faced, the nuclear legacy. And then ultimately it turned to climate change once I moved back home to the Marshalls. So the first poem I ever wrote was about an invisible elephant. And that was the first poem I ever wrote. It was an invisible elephant. I obviously wasn't seeing an actual invisible elephant, but I thought it'd be fun if I could. My mom came home and brought me a Hello Kitty journal, and I wrote all the time. And as I was learning English, I would write new words that I would learn into that Hello Kitty journal, and I'd write about the issues that I was dealing with and all of that, and it helped me process things basically. And then I shifted into poetry, and poetry helped me process things too. So that's what I use poetry for. It just kind of helped me understand the world around me. It was very much a therapeutic process. It was a very personal way of understanding myself. And it was basically this poetry course that taught you about the poetry from Black communities, Mexican Chicano communities, Latino communities. It would teach you about the history and also the poetry that came out of it, and make the connections. And so while I was in those courses, I started to realize, I don't know that much about Pacific Islander poetry, and what are the issues that are impacting my community that I could write about. And that's when I wrote my first nuclear testing, when I started grappling with nuclear testing, and when I started writing my first poem on the issues with Micronesians. It was like, what's our issues? And that helped me realize that poetry could be used for social justice movements. So it was really difficult to transition back to the Marshall Islands, but I had made a commitment that after I completed college, I would move back. That was always the deal. We'd complete our high school, go to college, move back, find a way to give back. That was always something we were raised with, that my mother really nailed into us, is you need to figure out a way to give back. How do you be of service, to your community and to your island? You come from a lot of privilege. That's what she would tell us. Yeah, so we came back, and it was difficult at first because there's a lot of cultural differences between the Marshalls and the US. And when you're raised in the US, there's ways in which you move, there's ways in which you express yourself that doesn't fit in out here. And if you don't know the language as well, it makes it even more difficult to fit in. So yeah, it was tough at first. But it was also the first time that I finally started to grapple with climate change as an issue.